to see students dedicating time on a Sunday to hear about carbon, forest carbon. So I will share my screen. Okay. Yeah, so I will, as Gabrielle said, I teach forest soils and forest ecology, and also I have a new course on forest carbon management. And I have a lot of studies over the past years to increase our knowledge on forest carbon in the specific context of the Quebec forest. So I will tell you a bit about the work and the lessons that we have learned from our work. I want first to introduce you to my student team. So if you meet them now, you know what they look like. So I have quite a big lab with lots of grad students, either masters or PhD students. So they are a real good team of superheroes of research on forest carbon and management. And yeah, so they dig a lot of soil pits and they take a lot of measures. So most of the learnings that I have, I owe them almost completely to their work. So I wanted to introduce them to you. And also, I want to say that they have voted to give us a name for my lab. So they have made a vote among themselves, and they have voted for the name Carbon Team, which is a weird French-English mix. So, but it's their decision, and I now use the word the name Carbon Team. Okay, so I'll talk to you about carbon and climate change. And so I want to start with, you're probably quite aware of those things, but just to make sure that I make a consistent story, I want to start with CO2 emissions and concentration in the atmosphere and climate change. So what you see on the photo on the left, this is not a photo from Star Wars. I often use photos from Star Wars, but this is not one of them. So this is a laboratory that's at the top of a mountain in Hawaii. And so it's the Mauna Loa Observatory. And it's one of the oldest observatories that measure CO2 concentration in the atmosphere. So you have the graph on the right shows the observations from Mauna Loa over the past decade. So this is a very famous graph where we see the increase in CO2 concentration over the past decades. So this graph now has its own Twitter handle. So if you go see a Killing Curve, you can have each day the new concentration that is measured by Mauna Loa. So in the past, it used to be that when they had the concentration, they had to send it by maybe telegraph or something else, or the guy had to go down the mountain to give the new concentration measured by Mauna Loa, but now it goes instantly on Twitter. So you can follow the concentration. So we see the increase over the past decade. So this is not a surprise, and the scientists around the world now say that this is the main cause of climate change that we are experiencing. And if we don't do anything and it keeps increasing like that, climate will get really in a very bad place for humanity. What you see now is what we call the global carbon budget. So this is a report that is published every year by a group of scientists. They look at the various data on carbon flux to the atmosphere and carbon removals, and they make what they call the global carbon budget. So that shows the main emissions and the main removals, and how does that influence the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere. So this is the mean for the past decade. the past decade. And what we see is that the main source of CO2 emission to the atmosphere is from fossil fuel sources, oil and coal and gas that we use for human activities. We send a lot of fossil CO2 to the atmosphere. And the main removal of CO2 is what is captured by vegetation. So it's the biosphere stores important amount of CO2, removes important amounts of CO2 from the atmosphere. But as you can see on the graph, it's not balanced. So there's more emissions than removals. So that's why there's an increase year after year in the quantity of CO2 in the atmosphere. So if we want to change the curve that we see at Mauna Loa, the increase that we see, we have to work on one of those arrows, either reducing the amount of emissions to the atmosphere or increasing the amount of removal. So we have to do better than what we see, what we have right now. So this balance that we have right now is responsible for a constant increase in the atmosphere. So this is the business as usual. So if we keep the practices that we do right now, CO2 will keep increasing in the atmosphere. So we have to work on those arrows to change it. So it means that in terms of forestry, for forest management, the current forest management that we do is responsible for this those arrows. So we have to change something if we want to work on those arrows. So this is the current state, the business as usual, and we have to do better than that. So what exactly can the forest sector or future forest professionals like you can do to reduce the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere? So the IPCC, which is a big international group of scientists that work, it's an organization that is linked to the UN. So it's under the UN, and it puts together thousands of scientists from different countries, and they look at the science on climate. Every year they produce new reports that make a summary for policymakers of what is the state of the art in terms of climate science. So the IPCC has published several reports relating to the role of the forest sector in the context of climate change. And so in one of their reports in 2007, they have published this picture. So I've made my own copy of this picture, but it's the same as in the original report, that shows what can be the role of the forest sector for climate change mitigation. So what the IPCC recognizes as a role for the forest sector is that we can work on increasing forest land. So if we take currently non-forested land and plant trees, we can increase the foresting by increasing the area, the forest land area. So that's one role. With the existing forest that we already have, we can take better care of it so that the forest stay healthy and grow well and fast. And then with those existing forests, we can manage it and provide wood to meet the needs of societies in terms of materials and energy. So we can do forest management to produce bioenergy or wood products that can meet needs of societies and displace fossil-based energy or materials. So that's the three role: working in the forest, increasing forest land, taking care of existing forest, and providing materials and energy for societies. So this is not me saying it, it's the IPCC who has said it several times over the year. And so they have repeated the same message over the years, saying that the forest sector has this important role to play for climate change mitigation. So they have said that several times to policymakers. And one thing that is important to consider is that when the IPCC says that, they put themselves in the position of the master of the world. So they say that the forest sector can play this role, but this role can have benefits in different parts of the world. For example, if one country does forest management and sell wood products to other countries, then there may be climate change benefits in other countries and not necessarily in the country that produced the wood. But then from the IPCC perspective, as long as there are some benefits somewhere in the world, then it's fine. So they really look at it from the perspective, if we look at the planet and not the specific policies of different countries. So that's an important part, because sometimes what the IPCC says, then the politicians, they try to put that in their policies, and then they realize that they can make a good action, but cannot take credit for this good action. So that the people that elect them will not see that it's them that make this good action. In this case, often politicians will not want to make this action, even if it can help save the world, if they cannot take a credit for this good action. So often, when we look at the recommendations from the IPCC, we see that there are sometimes a conflict between where the benefits happen and who can take credit for the benefits. But what the IPCC wants is to save the world, and this is the position that I'm taking right now, and I encourage the future forest professionals to take. You want to save the world and not just help local politicians take credit for good action. So when we look at those actions that the forest sector can take to combat climate change, and we try to put that into practice, into the forestry practice, we are often met with this conundrum. There's how can we best help mitigate climate change? Should we manage the forest for maximum wood production to put wood products on the markets, or should we work to leave the forest as carbon sinks? So this is often a question that we have when we try to find practical solutions for climate change mitigation. So this question is quite important and quite often asked by foresters, and it's an important question. I put a link there. There was a big international scientific summit exactly on that question in 2019. So if you look at that link, you will see different presentations from world-renowned scientists discussing exactly this question: should we manage for maximum wood production or leave the forest as carbon sinks? So I will take this question. I don't intend to respond it completely, but we'll give you some hints from the learnings that we have in Quebec. So I will give you the response to that question based on my research. Increasing carbon sequestration in forests cannot by itself mitigate climate change. So this is one result that we have from our research. And providing renewable and GHG light materials and energy to societies is an essential part of the role of the forest sector. So those are my points. So I spoil you the end of my presentation, and now I will work you through how I came to those conclusions. So I will talk about a lot of the research that we do at Laval University is based at Forêt Montmorency. So if we had a real in-person meeting, probably you would have been taken to Forêt Montmorency. So it's a research forest about 50 minutes drive from the campus of Laval University. It's 400 kilometers square forested areas under the responsibility of Laval University, and we use it as a laboratory to test different forest practices, and a lot of the learning that we have on forest carbon come from that area. So this is my son that we see on the photo. It's also an area that we can use as a tourist, and so this is a place I go often with my family. So just to, for those that are not from Quebec, this is the map. The red dot is Forêt Montmorency. So it's at the southern limit of the boreal forest. So the boreal biome, as you know, is a big green belt that goes around the planet. So a lot of the forests in Quebec and Canada are from the boreal biome. So Forêt Montmorency is a good example of the southern part of that boreal biome. So this is a typical stand that we have in Forêt Montmorency. Those students from Laval University do a lot of their field work in those kind of stands. So it's a balsam fir, white birch stand, quite a humid type of forest. Very little wildfire in this area of the boreal biome because there's too much snow and too much rain. There's not much wildfire risk. So the last fire was 3,000 years ago, approximately in Forêt Montmorency. So it's mostly driven by insect epidemics and wind throw. And also it's an important source of wood. The balsam fir, white birch area is a place where we do a lot of the forest management in Quebec. So in Forêt Montmorency, we also do forest management. So we try to find the best, the most economical, profitable, and ecologically sound way of doing forest management. So we do a real harvesting. So you have a example here. So we use those operations that we do year after year. We do some forest management to study how does forest management can influence the carbon cycles, the carbon stocks, and how can we optimize forest management with the goal of climate change mitigation. So what we have done over the past years is measure carbon stocks in stands following a clear-cut harvesting to see how carbon stocks evolve through time. So what we find in the sites that have just been clear-cut, so this is a photo of the small seedlings that you find right after clear-cut of balsam fir stems. So we know that those small seedlings, they are there and they will take CO2 from the atmosphere, just a ecology 101 class now. So they take CO2 through photosynthesis for their growth, and they use the CO2 to build their biomass of seedlings. But when they are small like that, they don't do a lot of photosynthesis because they don't have a lot of foliage yet because they are too small. But as they grow, they become bigger and bigger, and they can do more photosynthesis and capture more and more carbon as they get older. So in the first years following a clear cut, what we have as a phenomenon on the forest sites is the photosynthesis of those small seedlings. And we also have the decomposition from all the debris that is left on the forest site. So you have the humus, the forest floor that is there, and also all the debris that decompose and is a source of CO2 to the atmosphere. So the carbon balance of a forest site after clear cut is the balance of the photosynthesis and that remove CO2 from the atmosphere and build the carbon stock of the site, and the decomposition that throws CO2 to the atmosphere. So over the years, we have inventoried the carbon stocks of different clear-cut sites at different moments following harvesting. We have the good chance at Forêt Montmorency that there's not much ecological variability between the sites, and we have a long history of forest management. So we were able to find older sites that were all clear-cut using the same methods. So that allowed us to reconstruct the evolution of carbon stocks following clear-cut harvesting and understand what the balance of those phenomena, the photosynthesis that accumulate carbon stocks and the decomposition that sends carbon to the atmosphere. So this is the evolution of carbon stocks through time following a clear cut. You can see the big gray area is the amount of carbon in soils. As you see, there's more carbon in the soil than there is in all the rest of the pools. I'm sorry, it's in French. I haven't translated it, but all the others are either down with the debris or living biomass. So there are much more carbon in the soil than there is in the above ground stocks of the stand. This is because we have the boreal soil, they store a lot of carbon. So I introduce you to the humopheric podzol that we have at Forêt Montmorency. So it's a type of soil that stores a lot of carbon. What happens with the carbon stocks in soil following clear cut? What happens with carbon stocks in soils with climate change? Is this a carbon bomb that can explode, that will explode over the next years, or if we do bad management? This is a very large, important topic that I don't have time to talk about it a lot, and I don't have a lot of results about it either. So I will just leave you the question: what happens with the carbon stocks in soil? Is that a carbon bomb that will explode? This can be the topic of another conference, another time. So for the moment, I will remove the soil completely. I will leave you this cliffhanger for another moment so we can talk just about soils. And I will just talk about what's happening in the above ground storage. So this is what we see within the carbon stocks following clear cut. So you see the pattern. We can distinguish two periods in the evolution of carbon stock. In the first decades following clear cut, what we see is that forest site that we have clear cut is a net source of CO2 because there's a lot of decomposition that send the CO2 to the atmosphere, and there's not much photosynthesis because the small trees are not big enough to make a lot of photosynthesis. So the site is a net source of CO2. I use the expression that this is like the valley of the death that we have in the first decades, where the site is a net source of CO2 to the atmosphere. And this valley of the death lasts for about 26 years in Forêt Montmorency, in the typical balsam fir stand. So after harvest, the site is a net source of CO2 to the atmosphere for 26 years. So this is not how we can fight climate change if we just send more CO2 to the atmosphere. But the good news is after 26 years, the site then becomes a net sink of CO2. It has recaptured all the CO2 that was emitted in the first years, and it becomes a net sink. And so now we have, after 26 years, we have the mountain of life where the site finally becomes a net sink of CO2. So this pattern of the valley of the death and then the mountain of life, this is what our field results show us. And this is also what's observed in other types of ecosystem. The length of the valley of the death can be shorter or longer depending on the type of site. And the slope of the mountain of life can be steeper or less steep depending on the forest site, but this is a quite a pattern that we see in other ecosystems. So when we harvest a hectare of forest, we make a net source of it for some decades, and then it becomes a net sink. So this is an important thing to keep in mind when we plan forest management. So there are some things that we can do to work on the valley of the death. We can plan for better silvicultural treatments in the first years following clear cut by doing better, taking better care of the regeneration so that it can grow faster. We can perhaps do site preparation and plantation. In Forêt Montmorency, we mostly rely on natural regeneration. It's a bit in terms of promoting biodiversity, and it's part of the regulations across Quebec that we mostly try to support the natural regeneration. So we do little actual plantation, but there's the question that maybe if we do site prep and plantation, we can reduce or eliminate the value of the debt. I put a question mark because this is not something that we have tested specifically in the context of Forêt Montmorency. And there's the risk that site preparation might cause the soil carbon bomb that I told you a bit about. So yes, it may increase the growth of the seedlings, but maybe it has some negative effects as well. So we don't know yet is there a real way to reduce the value of the debt? Can partial cutting or continuous cover forestry instead of doing clear cutting, if we keep part of the mature forest cover, is that a way that we can reduce the value of the debt? That's also a possibility. I have lots of students getting a lot of measures on the field, not now, but last summer and this coming summer, to try to answer that. Is partial cutting a way to improve the carbon balance of harvesting? So that's one possibility that we still don't have the answer. But when we look at data elsewhere, so that's perhaps one way that we can reduce the value of the debt. So one question that we also have in Forêt Montmorency, and that's also coming up in other studies, should we cut old growth forests or old forest for the sake of carbon management? Do old growth forests contribute positively to carbon sequestration, or are they a source of carbon to the atmosphere? So that's one important question that you see a lot in the literature. In the context of Forêt Montmorency, so you have the Valley of the Dead, the mountain of life. But then at the time we did that study, we didn't have data from old growth or old forest. So we don't really know what happens when the stand reach a very old age, when it passed its mature state. Does it continue to sequester carbon? Does it lose carbon? Does it stay? Does it just maintain its carbon stocks? This is something that we didn't know at the time we did that study. So what we have done in the past years, we have looked for old growth forest in Forêt Montmorency. So Forêt Montmorency is an area that has been heavily managed since the beginning of the 20th century. So it's been clear cut almost entirely. So there's not a lot of old growth forest to find, but we have looked at all the maps and run around the territory to find the old growth forest. So this is a photo of what we were looking for, and this is what we found. So so the photo was not so bad. So we have found some very old stands. So for example, this stand, the last fire was 3,000 years ago, and it has not been harvested. It has experienced some spruce budworm epidemic. So the trees are not 3,000 years old. Of course, they have been replaced by younger trees, but the site itself has not been disturbed completely for a very, very long time. So we have found some of those stands to help us understand what happens when we go past the age of maturity. So when we started this study, we had two hypotheses that we wanted to see which one was right. So the two hypotheses was that old growth forest can continue to sequester carbon past the age of maturity. So after 80 years, the forest stand would continue to sequester carbon. So that's one hypothesis. The other one was that old-growth forests stop sequestering carbon and just remain stable. So that's the two hypotheses that we had. So we inventoried those old-growth forests. And what we found is that there's no change in total carbon stocks when a mature balsam-fir stand transition to old-growth stand. So as they get older, the balsam, if you don't harvest it, the balsam-fir stand, they lose carbon in their living biomass, but they increase carbon in the deadwood stocks. So in total, they don't lose carbon, they don't gain carbon, but they don't lose it either. They just stay stable. So that's a good news in terms that those old growth stands, they don't contribute actively to carbon sequestration to remove carbon from the atmosphere, but they remain important carbon stocks on the territory. So that helped us complete our vision, our story of carbon for Forêt Montmorency. So what we know now is that young stands are, after clear cut, are a net source of CO2. They become a net sink of CO2 starting from year 25, 26. And then they sequester carbon as they age. And when they reach the mature stand, and if we just leave them like that, they will not be a net sink, but they will remain an important carbon storage. So that's the learning that we had. So what do you do with that if you want to plan for forest management? What we know is that when you do a clear cut, you create a net source of CO2 to the atmosphere. So you might as well just stop all clear cut and just put your arms like that and just leave it as it is. If clear cutting just create a net source of CO2. So this is when you look just at what's happening in the forest. But as I say in French a lot, we don't do harvest just to take the wood and throw it at the bottom of the lake. We do harvest because we want to procure wood to meet the needs of society. So when you look at carbon management, you cannot just look at what's happening in the forest. You have to look at what's happening also in the wood that you actually harvest and how you use it on the markets. So that's one important part of the story that's quite important to keep in mind also. So the CO2 that is captured by photosynthesis make the wood, and this carbon you transfer it to wood products when you do harvesting, and then those wood products you use them. They are used to meet different needs of society. So you learn nothing with that. We've been using wood for quite a long time to meet the needs of humans. This is just examples of bridges that were built in wood in the 19th century across Quebec. So you can use, you harvest trees. They are made of carbon, and then you use that wood to build things like that can stay like that. They can store the carbon for many years and even centuries like that. So this is why we do harvesting, is that when you use the wood for wood products, then the wood product can store the carbon for a lifetime. So this is an example of a bridge that we built at Forêt Montmorency using wood from an area northern of Forêt Montmorency. So we built this bridge with the hope that it will outlive me and be there for many decades. So the carbon that it contains will be stored for a very long time. So we need to take into account this transfer of carbon from the forest to the products. And then the products, they will store the carbon for various periods of time, depending on what we do with the wood and the products. So the carbon storage in the products, what it does when you do the carbon balance of forest management, the transfer of carbon to the wood products, it delay emissions to the atmosphere, because you will model the carbon storage in the product. And if you do products that you know that will last a very long time, then you delay emissions for a very long period of time. And so this delay will be long as you have long-lived wood products, or if you plan for recycling the wood or to prolong the wood use. But if you just do short-lived products with your wood, for example, if the wood just served to do pulp and paper, the lifetime of a piece of paper is about 2 years, and then we model the carbon to be back into the atmosphere. But if you plan for long-lived wood products that can last a lifetime, then this carbon is not in the atmosphere, it's stored in all the wood products that you use in everyday life. So this part of the story is quite important to take into account, and I insist on that because we see a lot of reports about the impacts of forest management on carbon in forest, and we don't take into account the fact that we don't just do forest harvesting just to throw away the wood. We do that to serve the needs of society. So that's you have to take that into account when you do your carbon accounting, because the needs of the societies will not magically go away like that. Societies need materials and energy, and if it's not from renewable resources, it will be from fossil-based fossil-based sources. So that's an important aspect of the role of forest management in climate change mitigation. Now I want to talk a bit about the idea of planting trees. It's something that we hear a lot those days in different policies in Canada. The current government got elected on the promise of planting 2 billion trees over the next 10 years as a way of fighting climate change and saving the planet. And that's something that we find also in policies in other countries, a big push towards planting trees as a way to fight climate change. So can we save the planet by planting trees? There's also a lot of interest in forest carbon credits. So carbon credit is a way, if you are emitting GHG emission because of your activities, then you can pay a company to plant trees that will sequester carbon and compensate your emissions. So that's what we call the carbon credit. And the forest-based carbon trading is something that is getting more and more important around the world. So it's becoming a big quite an important economy that we see around the world. Different companies want to improve their environmental image, so they will buy carbon credits from different organizations to come as a way to compensate their own GHG emissions. So that's something that we see a lot. It was 2 years ago we had our own carbon credit scandal in Quebec. There are some journalists who went to look into some projects of forest carbon credits. So it was companies that were selling carbon credits to the other companies and say that they would plant trees to compensate their emission. But then the journalists went to try to find the trees that were supposedly planted. And what they found was either no trees, or half of the trees were dead, or there was very bad accounting. So it was quite a scandal in Quebec, and there were discussions that maybe this whole forest carbon credit was just a sham and something that, and there was a lot of bad talk about foresters that were crooks and promising carbon planting and not delivering. So we had this scandal, and what's interesting is that in other parts of the world, the same scandal was also bursting. So in different countries, so in the UK, in Sweden, they also had their carbon credit scandal about the same time as we had ours. So it's quite a question of this idea that we can pay someone else to plant trees to compensate our own emissions is something that is being questioned a lot. As you see in this newspaper, they call it a license to pollute, because it's a company that is a big emitter will pay someone else to plant trees, but then that allows the company to keep emitting. So there's a lot of ethical reflection to have on that. I don't have, well, Gabrielle asked me to talk about the carbon credit, but I don't have very good answers to that, because I think it's a larger debate. Should we allow polluters to keep polluting while other people do actions to offset this pollution? It's a question of equity and distribution of the merit, but also of the responsibility. I won't go further in that, but I encourage you to think more about that. But I want to give you an example of a plantation project that happened in Quebec, and just to raise a bit more question on that. So I've done some studies to see what happens when you plant trees for carbon sequestration. So this is work that was done by one of my master's students, and she did a presentation recently, and she let me use her PowerPoint. So she used the Civil War image with Captain America and Iron Man as an example, because this is what we do in my lab. There's always a superhero or Marvel references. So she studied a plantation of trees on agricultural abandoned land that we call the fallow land. And she compared those planted fallow land with natural succession. Fallow land that was just left to natural succession, and fallow land that were planted with the aim of increasing carbon sequestration. So in our example, the Captain America is the natural succession, natural vegetation succession on fallow land, and Iron Man is the plantation. So she has inventoried several fallow land that have different ages, that were both either natural succession or planted. And she measured carbon above ground and in the soil. So when she looked at her data for above ground carbon, we saw that the fallow land that were planted sequestered more carbon than the natural succession. So there was a good intention there to plant the fallow land with trees. It did increase the amount of carbon sequestered in the vegetation. So it's Iron Man who won this one. But then when we looked at the soil, then there was much more carbon in the soil of the fallow land that was just left to natural succession. So especially in the first decades, there was a lot of carbon stored and accumulating in soil relative to the afforested fallow land. So that was a bit of a surprise for us. And when in total we made the sum of the above ground and the soil, then they were exactly the same for the two types of fallow land after 50 years. There was the same amount of carbon in the natural succession and in the planted fallow land. But then it means that all the investment that was done for planting trees on fallow land with the aim of increasing carbon storage was for nothing, because just leaving the land by itself would store the same amount of carbon. So that was quite a big surprise. So this is result typical for a specific area in Quebec, in Abitibi. So it's in the western part of the boreal forest in Quebec, where they have quite a clay heavy soil. But then it still raised the question, if we sell that we can sequester carbon by planting trees on abandoned agricultural land, are we selling a false dream? Because if we would just leave the natural succession by itself, it also sequesters a lot of carbon. So that's one aspect that is important to keep in mind. So maybe it's not that easy to sequester carbon. One thing, however, that we have observed with that is that there was a lot of variability in the fallow land that was left to natural succession. You see the large confidence interval. So we found a lot of variability in those natural fallow land. So I will show you some photo. So this is a photo of a planted fallow land after 8 years. When we inventoried the different sites, when we went to visit planted fallow land, there was not much surprise. When we were looking for an 8-year-old plantation, then they all looked approximately the same. And when we arrived in older plantation, they all look exactly the same. So it was a very predictable pattern for the plantation on fallow land. But then when we visited fallow land left to natural succession, there was a lot of variability on the field. So you have on the left, it's a 5-year-old fallow land. And on the right, you have a 20-year-old fallow land. And they look almost exactly the same, but they have a 15-year difference. Another example here, you have the 20-year-old fallow land and a 30-year-old fallow land. And you see that you have lots of trees on the right one. So there was a lot of variability in the fallow land left to natural succession. So we did have a lot of replicates across the landscape, and on average, even though there was this large variation, they still arrive at the same result as the plantation in terms of carbon sequestration. But for a forester, trusting natural vegetation to just sequester carbon might be a bit worrying, because you don't know if a given fallow land will actually sequester a lot of carbon, or will it stay as a state with no vegetation. So when you plant trees, you have more certainty in the way it will evolve through time. So even though when you look at a large area and lots of fallow lands, maybe there's a chance, on average, plantation and natural succession will have the same carbon stock for a given site. There's a chance that the natural succession will not work so well at carbon sequestering. So there's a question of how do you deal with this uncertainty? We've seen when I presented, or my student Melina presented those results, people sent us information about other species. So this was a plantation with a white spruce, but maybe planting other species might increase the amount of carbon sequestered in the plantation relative to natural succession. So that's one thing that you can control. You can plant species that have a better growth rate, and so increase the amount of carbon that is sequestered. So that's one aspect of it. But another important aspect that we have noticed is that the natural succession on the fallow land was much more diverse in terms of vegetation, in terms of species. So you had lots of different tree species, shrub species, herbaceous species. So it was like the nature just occupy the space in all dimensions. So you have big trees, small trees, shrubs, herbaceous species on the ground, and even in the soil, you had roots that would just occupy the soil and at all depths. So that probably contribute to the amount of carbon that natural succession can store, because it occupies the space. And when you look at the plantation, the photo on the right, you just have the trees. You have no vegetation on the ground, and all the roots in the soil are exactly the same at the same depth. So there's a big difference there in terms of diversity, and that raised the question: how would a plantation that is that has little diversity, how will it evolve in time with the climate change? Or if there is a new insect that comes and attack white spruce, is there a chance that it will wipe out those plantations? Maybe white spruce that we planted will not be able to resist a change in climate in the future. So that's a risk that you have when you have not much diversity in a stand. In natural succession, you have lots of species, so there's maybe a chance that it would act better under a changing climate. So that's a question that I don't have the answer, but the idea that maybe having a promoting diversity in our forest management practice might be a way, yes, to sequester carbon, but maybe to resist that those carbon stocks could resist through time, even if there is a change in climate. So I leave that question open because I don't have the answer, but that's something that is being discussed. Should we not just look at carbon storage, but at the resilience of this carbon stocks under a changing climate? So that's the idea of when we talk about reducing GHG emission to the atmosphere or increasing GHG sinks, we talk about climate change mitigation. So it's like the action of fighting climate change. But another aspect that is important is adaptation to climate change. So it's adjusting natural and human systems to a changing climate. So I will just take the analogy of a football team. In a football team, you have attack players. So they are like doing the mitigation. You fight climate change, but you also need defense player that will resist climate change. So if you want to have a very successful football team, you need super good attack player and super good defense players. So this is how you win trophies. So this is the Rouge et Or football team of Laval University. They are very successful because they have very good attack players and defense players. So it's the same when we think about climate change. We need to mitigate, so we need to fight climate change, but we also need to be able to adapt to resist to climate change. So that might be that's an important topic to keep in mind. And just an example here, this is for some modeling that we've done for a region in southern Quebec. We have managed, we have simulated a forest area under 3 climate change scenarios. So the first one shows, it's called baseline. It's if there's no climate change, the climate would stay the same for the next century, which is not very realistic. And then the last scenario at the bottom is under quite important climate change, so climate warming. So we looked at how the forest would react to climate warming. And what we found is that for this the specific area that we simulated, forest management with no climate change can increase the carbon sink in the forest. But then if there's important climate warming, this forest sink would be quite reduced. So climate can have an important impact on forest sink. And it becomes important if, so you have this reduction in the forest sink. And what happens is when you do forest management, you put wood products on the market, but then those wood products, they decompose with time, and they will emit, they will store carbon for a period of time. But then if you produce a lot of pulp and paper, for example, this increase the emissions to the atmosphere. So the emissions from the wood products, it can be important if you have a large share of short-lived wood products. So in the region that we have simulated there, a lot of the wood was just dedicated to pulp and paper. So that's why you have the huge orange bars, that the wood products was an important source of emission for that region. And what we saw is that if the forest sink gets smaller with a warmer climate, and we keep just harvesting the same way, it could mean trouble, and then the forest and the wood products can become important source of CO2 to the atmosphere. So that's why you have to think about the impact of your forest management on the resilience of the forest sink in the future. I want to say a word about the role of the wood products on the market. Maybe you saw on that graph the yellow bars on the graph. It's the substitution effect. It's the displacement effect that wood products have on markets. So when you produce wood products that can be used to replace fossil-based products, they have what we call a displacement effect. For example, if we build a bridge in wood instead of building it in concrete, then we prevent the production of concrete and the emission from concrete production. So that means we have this positive displacement effect. So we reduce the emission of carbon to the atmosphere by preventing concrete production. So this is what we call the displacement effect. And the effect of wood products on market is all the more important if our wood products are long-lived, if they can store their carbon for a very long time, or if they are used to displace extremely GHG intensive materials and energy. So if we use the wood products to replace the dirtiest source of fossil-based materials and energy. So just to finish with that, we did some modeling for the whole of the forest sector. So this is the graph that you see at the top. We have simulated different forest management scenarios where we increase harvest, and we wanted to see if doing more intensive forest management and increasing harvest can help fight climate change. But as you see, all the lines are close to the line of zero. So that means by just increasing harvest, we didn't have any real benefits for climate change mitigation. But then we simulated scenarios, so that's the graph at the bottom, where we increase harvest, but we improve the wood processing and the displacement that wood products can do on markets. And then we had a significant effect on climate change mitigation. So it was not the harvesting by itself. It's really what do we do with the wood and how do we use it to meet human needs. And just to say that the effects that we simulated, we had to simulate extremely strong improvement and better use of wood. It was not just marginal improvement of wood processing. We had to simulate extremely important and drastic change in the way we process wood and we use it on the markets. So that means just forest management by itself is not necessary, is not enough. We really need to be extremely bold and ambitious in the way we process and use wood in societies if we want to really have a good impact on climate change mitigation. I will just finish with the points that I told you at the beginning. Just increasing carbon sequestration in forest cannot by itself mitigate climate change. And it is more tricky than it appears, because sometimes you think that planting trees will help you, but then maybe just leaving nature doing its job is the best way. And we need to at least maintain the forest sink. And we know that under a changing climate, there might be trouble with the forest sink. So that's an area that needs that we need to put a lot of efforts. and providing renewable and GHG-like materials and energy to meet human needs is an important, essential role of the forest sector. But it doesn't mean that we need to harvest more. It especially means that we need to do better with the wood that we actually harvest and use it better to meet human needs, to really have a positive impact. So what is the best strategy to meet those those recommendations? So we can panic and say, this is not possible. How can we do that? We can just ignore it and say, yeah, that's not gonna happen. Or we can just say that there's nothing we can do. We haven't tried anything and we're all out of ideas. Or we can do more research to find the perfect management scenarios, management strategies, and wood production and use. And this is something that is possible. We see good examples from other countries, and we see how research that we do help bring answers. There's a lot of questions to answer, but we are doing more and more research that can help define better policies and better practices on the field. So I will just finish with that image from the superheroes of forest. I would like that future forest professionals feel that they can be superhero for climate change mitigation by using the best science possible and contributing to increase knowledge. So this is what I want to tell you now.
Thank you very much, Evelyne. That was awesome. Also a very big challenge, I think, to give such a complete presentation in an hour. It's a complicated subject for sure, and I mean, I think you did a really good job, in my opinion. Do you guys have any questions? You can go ahead and open your mics or write in the chat. Whatever feels most comfortable for you.
I have a question. Hi, it was really great to hear from you. I'm Robin. I'm from the University of Montana. And so, excuse me while I put together the pieces here. But so what I was thinking as you're going through this is that, yes, maintaining forest management to ensure forests as carbon sinks or storage is part of the answer here, but it seems like an equally important aspect of this is reducing clear-cutting practices, which I'm not sure how common those still are in Quebec, or what your thoughts are on that idea and how best to go about tackling that piece.
Yeah, that's in the boreal forest of Quebec, as it is around the world. The clear cut is often the main practice that we use. But what we find is that it creates an important carbon source, and it also has other disadvantages in terms of biodiversity. And so, a lot of work on developing continuous cover forestry. So doing a partial cut. We think that it will help with the Valley of the Death, that it will reduce the carbon emissions. There's the question, can you maintain a steady flow of wood products if you use more partial cuts? So that's one aspect that's one reason why it's not more largely adopted in current practices. It also makes the cubic meter of wood more expensive. But then again, let's do our research. There's a lot of great research on the partial cut around the world, and scientists are finding ways to make a partial cut more profitable, to make sure that it can maintain a steady flow of wood. And we have some simulations for Forêt Montmorency where we drastically reduce the amount of clear cut and increase increase partial cut with almost no impact on the cost of the cubic meter. And for carbon, it's fantastic, and probably also for biodiversity. So there's a change of paradigm that we need to do in forestry. So it's fun to see that it's the same question in Montana. But I think the forest sector is a bit conservative, and introducing new paradigm is also always complicated. But I think that's one that is we are turning a corner now for a continuous cover forestry. I think it will become probably in 10 years, it will be the standard practice in boreal forest, and we will have left the clear cut behind. Well, I hope.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, at least in the Northwest here, it really depends on who owns the land. Private landowners almost always clear cut, but a lot of our land here is federal, and that's not the case in most of it.
Okay. It's mostly public land in Quebec, but the clear cut is happening mostly on public land, and in the private land that we have, they use it. They are more in the south and more of the temperate hardwood types, and they use more partial cut in that case. So it's really our issue is really with the boreal ones. But that's yeah, we can talk again in 10 years and see if the prediction was was right.
Thanks.
I might have a question. It's really interesting to see how wood products can, of course, help mitigate climate change. But how much can we expect to have a long-term flow of wood products coming out of the forest? If when we're harvesting trees, we're taking away carbon, which isn't really a problem since it's in the atmosphere. But I'm guessing we're also taking away minerals like phosphorus and such from the forest. That's not going to decompose.
That's a concern. That was a lot of studies looked at that, and because of the long cycles of our forest rotations, it doesn't appear to be an important problem. Just doing harvesting, even clear cut or partial cut, yes, it removes a part of the nutrients that is not returned to the forest ecosystem, but we don't have examples of really degrading the site productivity through harvest. In extremely intensive management scenarios, for example, there's a huge study across North America that's called the long-term site productivity project. So it's experimental designs across North America, including in Canada, where they tested different intensities of forest management. And they saw, and it's been going on for several decades, and they have followed the nutrient cycle and site productivity, and they saw negative impacts when you do extremely intensive forest management. And the extremely intensive was if you remove all the forest floor and you expose the mineral soil, and if you put herbicide on all the species, the ground vegetation that could appear. They call this treatment the nuclear winter. So they saw negative impact with the nuclear winter. But then anything else didn't have much impact. In some sites that are extremely poor at the beginning, you may have impacts, but usually it's not a big concern.
I see. Yeah, that's interesting. It makes sense too,
but
yeah.
it's a good. I mean, it's a good question. It's been a concern enough to make this huge North American project. So that's interesting study and a nice cooperation among Canada and US, the LTSP.
Mm-hmm. Do you know if anyone from Laval is part of that project?
I've participated a bit. We don't have sites, LTSP sites in Quebec, but there are some in Ontario. And me and other colleagues from the Canadian Forest Service, we were involved in the sites in Ontario. But the sites that we have at Forêt Montmorency, some of the research that we have at Forêt Montmorency are considered the satellite sites for the LTSP. So that's why I'm aware of that project. But they have a nice website where they show all, and they have like 20 or 30 years of follow up on the same sites. So it's quite interesting to have a look if you want to have a long-term perspective of site productivity.
Yeah, that sounds great. Did anybody have any more questions? Of course, you're getting some congratulations messages in the chat, which is not surprising. I don't see any questions though.
I just want to say hi to all of you, and I wish I could know where everybody is based and what they are doing. So don't hesitate to write to me if you want to discuss. Of course, for Laval students, you know where to find me, but others, please don't hesitate to get in touch if you want to discuss more or want to come and visit our research forest or anything.
All right. Well, I think if no more questions arise, then we could go ahead and wave goodbye to the first weekend of CARM. But otherwise, it's very generous of you, Evelyne. I could post your email address if you don't mind in our group, so that if you do have any more questions in the coming days, you can go ahead and email Evelyne. But otherwise, thanks for joining, guys. It's been thanks again, Evelyne, for your presentation, and we've got an awesome schedule coming up next weekend as well. Sorry, with the presentations from Michigan Tech and UNBC. So there you go. Hi to Joni and Greg, which have managed to find speakers for next weekend. So I hope to see you guys there.
Great. Thank you so much. Yes.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Yeah, have a good day.
See you guys next week.
See you next week.
Gab, tu m'entends-tu?
Ouais, je t'entends super bien.
T'as-tu le programme pour... y a-tu comme un programme en quelque part?
Ouais, on a fait un programme, mais on l'a fait vraiment dernière minute, fait que j'ai pas
Correct.
pris le temps de le mettre clean, mais pour la fin de semaine prochaine, on est pas mal set, fait que est-ce que t'as liké l'événement du CARM? Je pourrais t'envoyer le lien si... Ah, ok, ben super.
J'ai-tu liké l'événement? Je sais pas, je suis dans l'événement, j'ai marqué
Ok.
que je participais.
Ah ouais, ben c'est correct, c'était plus ça ma question. Mais dans ce cas-là, je pensais poster l'agenda de la fin de semaine prochaine.
Ok. Ça va-tu être encore enregistré? Parce qu'en fin de semaine prochaine, je suis au parc des Hautes-Gorges.
Ouais, je compte l'enregistrer. D'ailleurs, tu me rappelles de finir cet enregistrement-là.